Welcome everybody. Morning. Thanks for coming here today. As some of you may know, we have been doing this type of events about principle of cultural competence. And we realized as part of this process, we need to address also the problem or the issue of implicit bias, because after all, people are the ones who take the decisions to make changes. And that's the reason that we're here today. The keynote speaker that we have today is Diana Oting. She's the executive co-director of SPAN. SPAN is a parent-led organization located in New Jersey. She also serves as the co-director of the National Center of Family Professional Partnership. She's the co-director also of the NE Parent Center Assistance and Collaboration Team. She's the co-director of the Reach for Transition and Collaboration for 9 parent centers in the NE. She's the director of the National Center for Parent Leadership, Advocacy, and Community Empowerment. They advocate to ensure that a place at the table for every family. She's a member of the board of the National Federation of Families for Children of Mental Health, and the New Jersey Alliance of Family Support Organizations. She serves as a consultant and Wisdom Council member for the National Center for Cultural Competence. She oversees SPAN work with the New Jersey statewide network for cultural competence, including planning and facilitation of the annual New Jersey statewide cultural competence conference. She has 4 diverse adult children and a 10-year-old granddaughter. Oting is of Cajun and Native American, Cherokee, Sioux, and Yuma backgrounds. It's a pleasure to having her here today.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to spend time with people who are committed to ensuring that everyone has access to the services and supports and equity that they need in our country, particularly now when so many children and families and individuals are facing increased prejudice and discrimination. I'm talking today about It's All in Your Head, Overcoming Implicit Biases to Serve All Families. And this presentation is really just an overview and introduction to this very rich and detailed and complicated topic. So I hope that I do it justice in the amount of time that I have. I'm going to try to define the difference between implicit and explicit bias, talk a little bit about what we know about how implicit bias impacts decision-making and the actions that we take, talk about some strategies to address implicit bias and facilitate culturally responsive services, and also discuss a wonderful tool called the Implicit Association Tool and how it can be used for self-reflection and as a measure for effective decision-making. I think many people are very familiar with the concept of explicit bias, those explicit stereotypes that are the result of intentional, conscious, and controllable thoughts and beliefs. And they're usually directed toward a group of people based on what is being perceived about those people. So one explicit stereotype example would be that all adolescent girls like to play with dolls and makeup. So explicit bias, the characteristics are that it's deliberate, it's conscious, it's easier to recognize, and it often reflects social and personal values. I love this set of pictures where you have people who represent different stereotypes holding out a placard. I'm a person, so I must be stereotyped. I'm a girl, so I must wear pink. I'm a teenage mom, so I must be an irresponsible slut. I'm a vegetarian, so I must eat only vegetables. And by the way, I'm a vegetarian, and I also eat other things besides vegetables. I'm a dancer, so I must be a show-off, etc. And I think one of the things that's so important to recognize is that, we have many, many different stereotypes about people. And the stereotypes that we have are shaped by many things in our lives. On the other hand, implicit bias is a positive or negative mental attitude towards a person, thing, or group that a person holds at an unconscious level. So implicit bias is typically unconscious. It's involuntarily formed. It may even be a habit. And so the difference between explicit bias and implicit bias is that we're generally aware of our explicit biases and often unaware of our implicit biases and the impact they have on our behavior and decisions. So here, we talk about explicit bias. It's generally expressed directly, whereas implicit bias is expressed indirectly. Explicit, generally aware of that bias that we may have, and implicit, we're unaware of it. Explicit bias operates consciously, whereas implicit bias operates subconsciously. An example might be someone saying, I like whites more than Latinos, or thinking that to themselves. Whereas an implicit bias would be sitting further away from a Latino than a white individual and not even being aware why it is you're doing that. One of the things to think about is this concept of implicit social cognition. This is thoughts and feelings that are outside of our conscious awareness and control. There are many ways that implicit bias impacts our lives. The automatic nature of our beliefs or stereotypes when they capture different associations between social groups and their common stereotypes, and the automatic nature of attitudes or preferences when they capture associations between social groups and common evaluations of those groups. So professionally, implicit bias often impacts the judgments we form about individuals, patients, constituents, co-workers, the judgments we form about situations and circumstances that are based on stereotypes. It impacts our interpretation of different people's behavior. It impacts our effectiveness and impact of the interactions that we have with patients, families, community members, students, etc. And so one example is in research that's been done around teachers. Teachers of all races and ethnicities, when they ask a question, will typically give a white student more time to respond before they assume that that student doesn't know the answer than they will give a black student. And when you ask them a question about why they do that, their first response is, I don't do that. And then you show them videos of how much longer they will wait for a white student to respond before assuming that the white student doesn't know the answer compared to a black student, and they're completely surprised. And that's because it is an implicit bias. They have an implicit belief that white students are more likely to know the answer, and therefore you can wait a little longer because they're likely to come up with it compared to black students. So I like this slide talking about kind of being of two minds. So we have a reflective system for controlled processing. This is a conscious and explicit system. It's effortful and requires motivation and takes more time. But we also have a reflexive system that really engages in automatic processing, and it's often unconscious, doesn't require very much effort, and really acts very quickly because we're not consciously thinking about it. And different neural structures actually distinguish these two reflective versus reflexive systems. And one area to really look at in more detail when you're thinking about this is when you're trying to work with people who have experienced trauma, because their reflexive system around fear and powerlessness can really become very, very powerful, and they're not even aware because it's an automatic processing. I encourage you to investigate that area of working with people who've been impacted by trauma, particularly since we know that people who experience prejudice and discrimination are much more likely to have been in situations where they have faced trauma. So there's an intersection between providing trauma-informed care and services, and providing services that are culturally appropriate. So the reflexive system, that FAST system, uses implicit associations. And when you bring one of those, concepts to mind, others that are connected to that in our reflexive system are just unconsciously activated. And that activation that happens unconsciously can often be at odds with our conscious goals and can influence our attention, perception, judgment, and behavior. So that hidden assumption that we're not even aware of can interfere with our attempts to, for example, be culturally aware and culturally competent. Most of us are unaware of our implicit biases. So when you talk about race, for example, implicit racial bias often will reside in our unconscious mind. And that's the part of our brain that many people believe is really beyond our direct control. Our unconscious attitudes are generally less egalitarian than what we explicitly think about race. And so our refusal to talk about and confront issues of race or other areas of prejudice and discrimination reinforces that implicit bias. So why should we care about implicit bias? It's pretty important because implicit bias can lead to prejudice and stereotyping, discrimination, inequality, injustice, and negative symbolic attitudes. There are many different types of implicit biases: disability, gender and gender identification, race, ethnicity, language, age, religion, sexual orientation or preference, physical attributes, economic status, having an immigrant or a limited English proficient status. And there are many more than these, but these are some of the most common types of implicit biases that exist in our society. What are some of the implications for behavior of implicit biases? There are different research studies that have shown that implicit racial biases can predict our amygdala activation, so that's our fear response, giving people lower performance ratings, not based on their actual performance, but based on that implicit racial bias. Avoiding of the other group, so avoiding people from a race where we have an implicit racial bias. And when we have interactions, more negative interactions. There are also implications for gender biases. Implicit gender biases often predict biased ratings of job candidates. It can also be manifested in letters of recommendation, where men are more often described with superlatives and as having ability compared to women. And women are more often described as working hard. And it even can contribute to women's weaker association with math, even among math and science majors. And when you think about the social determinants of health, things like economic stability, neighborhood and physical environment, education, food, community and social context, and the healthcare system, all of which contribute to health outcomes, including mortality and morbidity, life expectancy, healthcare expenditures, health status, functional limitations, etc. We can see many places where implicit biases can lead to much poorer health outcomes because those implicit biases impact the social determinants of health. We think about the impact on social determinants of health, thinking about housing, so affordable housing, redlining, loans and insurance. And I'll just give you an example. My husband and I and our two best friends from Michigan moved to New York at the same time and went to the same, we're looking to move to the same neighborhood and went to the same rental agencies. My husband and I were showing up in Brooklyn, not having jobs, and he was there looking for places, and he is white. And our friends were showing up, both of them having professor jobs with tenure, and he, the husband in that relationship was there, and he was African American. And the places that he was shown were in less desirable neighborhoods than the places my husband was shown, even though he and his wife both had prestigious jobs, and we were showing up without jobs, and we were looking for housing in the same neighborhood. So that was clearly some, bias, and we don't know whether that was explicit or implicit bias, but it's certainly implicit bias shows up in things like redlining. It shows up in things like how whether or not you're able to get loans or how much you pay for insurance. Employment, so the impact of Black sounding names, and impact of criminal record on getting called back for jobs. In the criminal justice system, racial profiling, jury bias, and the impact of both explicit and implicit biases in sentencing. And then when you look at education, so special education, discipline, teacher expectations, and behavior. But I want to go into a little bit more detail thinking about impact on healthcare, and we're going to look at some of these areas of implicit bias. So in health, Blacks have lower rates of cardiac surgeries, fewer hip and knee replacements, and fewer kidney and liver transplants for the same conditions. Diabetic African Americans are more often amputated than whites who are diabetic. In several studies, Blacks receive less pain medication for the same injuries and diseases and the same level of reported pain than whites. And Blacks were more likely to be castrated as a treatment for prostate prostate cancer than whites. Now, if you ask the doctors who made these recommendations, who gave these prescriptions for pain medication, who ordered amputation as opposed to another course of treatment, and you just ask them about whether or not they had explicit prejudices against Blacks, they would say no. And they probably would not believe it unless you showed them the data that this was the outcome of the implicit bias of health providers. There were 600 studies looking at the impact of bias on healthcare based on race. And these are just some of the areas where disparities were found. Cancer treatment, receipt of children's medication, treatment for HIV and AIDS, diabetes management, cardiovascular treatment, pain management, clinical test referral rates, physician communication behaviors, placement on kidney transplant wait lists, physician perceptions, and amputation. And then a review of 171 studies in the VA system found disparities based on race in arthritis pain management, cancer treatment, diabetes, heart and vascular disease treatment, mental health and substance abuse treatment, and preventative care. And again, it's unlikely that any of the people who were providing this disparate healthcare treatment would ever say that they were doing it because of bias. But there are also many other types of implicit biases that impact healthcare. So for example, for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people, about 30% of LGBT people reported postponing care when they're sick or injured and postponing preventive health care due to discrimination and disrespect by providers. And female to male transgender people were the most likely to postpone that care due to discrimination. 1 in 5 transgender people has been denied services by a doctor or other provider due to their gender. And racial and ethnic minority transgender people are more likely to be denied services. And gay parents even report negative experience in their children's health care due to their sexuality. And then looking at things like obesity, body image, body conditions, etc. Overweight patients are more likely to report that they're treated disrespectfully by health providers. In fact, 53% of overweight or obese women report inappropriate comments from their doctor. And of course, patients who report weight discrimination from health providers generally avoid routine care like cancer screenings. And in a study conducted on weight bias in 2009 on the general population and on physicians, found that both the general population and the physicians had strong both implicit and explicit anti-fat bias, and that they preferred thin people to fat people. So what can we do to try to de-bias? There are many, many other examples that I could have provided, but those were just some of the ones that I thought really showed very clearly that implicit bias can have an impact on the services that we provide and on the outcomes that people experience as a as a result. So 3 key areas of focus for de-biasing implicit bias is education, exposure, and checking our approaches. And we're going to go through each of these. So the 2-strategy solution, where we have unconscious biases that lead to negative judgment and behavior, is consciously overriding the biases and working to change our implicit associations. So what do we do to override unconscious bias? We have to be motivated to control our bias. We have to be aware of the potential for bias, which is why learning about implicit bias and how it represents itself and its impact is so important. And we have to take the time to consider individual characteristics and avoid stereotyped evaluations or judgments. So the good news, and this really is good news, is that motivation to be fair makes a difference, makes a big difference. Motivation has a significant impact on explicit expressions of bias. And implicit biases are malleable and they can be changed. When people are pushed to change by specific motivations, including the motivation to be fair and the motivation to not be or appear prejudiced, even the motivation to avoid interracial conflict. But motivation requires that we know that there is an issue. So that means that we have to recognize the existence of implicit biases and responses. And one of the ways to help do that on an individual basis is through using the IAT test, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Implicit biases can also be changed when people invest the effort to practice specific strategies to avoid stereotypical or prejudicial responses, and also by changing the social context in which we live, work, have relationships. And the longer the period of exposure to counter stereotypes, the greater the decrease in stereotypical attitudes and behavior. So let's, when we think about approaches that we have to take, you're thinking about higher level processing, reducing our cognitive load and taking longer time, slower decision making, using checklists, making procedural and organizational changes, and even looking at micro-messaging. So we're going to go through and talk about some of these. So this idea of staring, not blinking, and basically what that means is, you know, when you stare, you're actually paying attention to something for a longer period of time. When you're blinking, it's a fast movement. You know, our blinks are not conscious. We don't consciously blink, but we consciously stare. And so implicit bias can be limited by giving ourselves more time to consider decisions. That's, you know, decreasing the cognitive load, decreasing the amount and complexity of information that we're trying to process in any given time frame. So related to that time to consider is the opportunity to engage in high effort processing of information. So that's the stare, the consciously consider. Don't just blink and go along with off the cuff or your kind of your first thinking. Using checklists at key decision points can also encourage less biased decisions by providing a more objective framework to assess your thinking. For example, if we're talking about making a hiring decision, it's important to agree beforehand about what the basic merit criteria are. So are we looking for book smarts and degrees? Are we looking for street smarts and direct experience? This helps assure that we are decreasing attention on the biased characteristics that may be influencing our decision making. It also limits our tendency to kind of remake the criteria fit the in-group favoritism and the preferred candidate. Also, by writing, instead of discussing, you know, writing down our observations, whether it's when we're, you know, doing making hiring decisions, or when we are making decisions about people that we're going to partner with, or what actions we're going to take with particular people with whom we're working, writing things down instead of just discussing them off the cuff is a way that we can help reduce the impact of our implicit bias in the decisions that we make and the judgments that we make about other people. Another approach to debiasing is to use procedural changes so that we can disrupt the link between implicit bias and discriminatory behavior through changed procedures. Also, adding a level of accountability to processes can also debias decisional outcomes. If we think we are being monitored or that we have to explain our decisions, we're more motivated to act in an unbiased or debiased way. But of course, it's important that the accountability be to a supervisor or a superior who, him or herself, also offers a clear, unbiased approach. So when you're thinking about procedural or organizational changes, how do you write up your job descriptions? What do you say in your recruitment descriptions when you're telling people that you are trying to recruit somebody to work with you? Or what about, what kind of procedural organizational changes might you want to make sure that when you're making decisions about the services you're going to provide to someone or the access you're going to provide to someone, that you're doing it based on unbiased rules or unbiased criteria. Another approach to debiasing is to focus on micro-messaging, where small messages are sent, and generally these are sent without conscious thought or intent. So think about, the pictures that hang in your office. And it's interesting, when the statue of women suffragettes joined the many male statues in the Capitol Rotunda, Senator Olympia Snowe commented that her work environment had improved. Some other examples: an associate of color shares an idea and no one responds. The white leadership is seen repeatedly chatting in the hallways with certain staff, perhaps white staff, and not with others. Versus, having things hanging in your office where people who come in for services can see that do reflect the variety of the community that you're serving, and they do reflect, and not just thinking about race and ethnicity, but also LGBT and people who don't, who aren't skinny, and two parents who are men and a single parent. All the different ways in which we can have implicit biases, really, explicitly considering how can we create an environment so that we are explicitly letting people know that we are interested in equity, and that we are working to avoid having a negative impact of our implicit biases on the experiences that they have with us. So we can also work to change our unconscious bias. And there are two main ways to change unconscious bias. One is through education, and another is through exposure. And they really work hand in hand, and they're both important. So in terms of education, we can take and consider the results of the implicit bias tests that will help us understand, be more aware and mindful of our own implicit biases, and also understand through education that one of the ways that we address and cut our implicit biases off at the knees is to really use that more explicit kind of thinking, that stare instead of a blink. In terms of exposure, contact, positive exemplars, and perspective taking. So making contact with positive, diverse colleagues and exemplars, and practice taking the quote-unquote other perspective, all contribute to decreasing an implicitly biased response. And then another important approach is to practice cultural reciprocity, and to understand that people from various cultural experiences have different ways of responding to relationships, to parenting, to conflict, to health, to disability, to help-seeking behaviors. That culture shapes our status, our relationships, and our social behaviors with regard to many things, including conflict resolution. issues around justice for an individual, which is, kind of the explicit goal in our society, versus the concept of group harmony, which many people from other cultural backgrounds, and when I say culture, I'm using the definition from the National Center for Cultural Competence, which is not just race and ethnicity, but also includes, religion and body image and geographic location, all the different things that shape us and contribute to our cultural beliefs and cultural behaviors. Even the willingness to question authority is often a result of or influenced by our cultural experiences and beliefs. And also, people communicate and process information differently, often based on their cultural realities. So rational versus intuitive, linear versus circular thinking, abstract thinkers versus concrete thinkers, people who are time-bound versus people who are not time-bound. So, when you work with people who are from more rural areas, who have more, experience on farms, or people who historically have had that as part of their cultural experience, the issue of 10:15 doesn't mean a lot. Sunrise means a lot. High noon means a lot. Sunset means a lot. But 10:15, 2:30, that doesn't have the same relationship, because culturally, what has been important is, having the ability to see, to be able to do the work in the fields that you have to do as a farmer. And then practicing cultural reciprocity is really a process, not an outcome. It's a process that really focuses on developing reciprocal relationships of trust between yourself and the people with whom you are working and the people that you are supporting or serving. Learning about the other person and the cultural beliefs and the cultural understandings that guide their behavior, but also sharing about yourself, which requires you to be aware of your own cultural influences. Asking families what will work for them, and not assuming that what works for you works for them, or that worked for another family who might share some of the same cultural experiences as this family will also work for them. But really asking families how they want to be worked with. Another critical component of cultural reciprocity is listening with the heart. So listening with our heart for the heart of what the person that we are working with is saying, and also sharing our heart and letting them understand that we are here to support them in the way that they want to be supported. Stephen Covey says, do unto others as they would have you do unto them, and seek first to understand and then to be understood. There's a great book that was written by Dr. Beth Harry on using cultural reciprocity with families. It was written around the special education system, but it certainly is relevant to people who work in any system with people with disabilities, as well as any people from any kind of family situation, even if they don't have disabilities in their family. So key strategies to address implicit bias: become aware of your own individual perceptions and stereotypes and their impact on your decision-making, as well as the individual perceptions and stereotypes and impact on decision-making of other people. So your co-workers, your supervisors, the people you supervise, people in other systems. So you may be working at a community-based organization that's working with a state agency, and you need also to become aware of the perceptions and stereotypes and the impact on decision-making of implicit biases that people from other agencies may also have that might impact the families that you're trying to serve. It's also critical to engage in opportunities to learn about diverse cultures, and not in a way to substitute one stereotype for another. So I'm a Cajun from Golden Meadow, Louisiana, which is one of the bayous in Louisiana, Bayou Lafourche. But I've been out of Louisiana. I mean, I go there every year, but I haven't lived in Louisiana for a long time. So just by knowing that I'm a Cajun doesn't mean that you're going to know very much about me. And if you think I'm going to eat a bunch of shrimp, not understanding that I'm also a vegetarian, then you're going to make some assumptions about my culture that are going to not be accurate. So get to know your colleagues, the patients, the constituents, the families and children that you serve, and their backgrounds, and work explicitly to suspend those implicit negative judgments that you may have. Work also to recognize that diversity is real and dynamic and legitimate, and there's more than one way to do things. And be brave. This is one of the most important strategies to address implicit bias, because you can do a lot with yourself as an individual, and yet if you're still operating in a system or an organization that is still making decisions and judgments based on implicit bias, you're not going to be able to be very effective. And the people that you're working with are still going to experience decisions and judgments based on those implicit biases, even if you've done the hard work to overcome those implicit biases in yourself. So it's critical to engage in those courageous conversations to increase knowledge and address the negative perceptions, stereotypes, and attitudes of the people you work with, the people you work for, the people that you partner with, etc. I'm going to talk just a little bit now about the implicit association tool. It was founded as a multi-university research collaboration in 1998 with the University of Washington, Harvard University, and the University of Virginia. And its purpose is to disseminate and help in the application of implicit social cognition research. It's an assessment that can help us examine the automatic pilot that drives our thoughts and actions. And it measures implicit attitudes and beliefs that we are yet usually either unwilling or unable to report because we aren't aware that we have those biases. By aggregating the results of these assessments, it also helps examine kind of broader social attitudes in our society, and it offers one good way to probe unconscious bias. These are two websites. One is for the overall project Implicit, and the other is the website where you can actually view the IAT tools. And I'm going to show you some of the information that has come out of the aggregation of the responses of people who do these assessments on the web. So this is around age. So you see that 35% of people who've completed this assessment that looks at implicit bias on the basis of age have a strong automatic preference for young people compared to old people. 29% a moderate automatic preference, and 16% a slight automatic preference. So if you look at that, that's almost 70% of, or actually 75% of people who have either a strong, moderate, or automatic preference for young people compared to old people. Look at disability. So you have 33% have a strong automatic preference for able people compared to disabled people, 27% a moderate automatic preference, and 16% a slight automatic preference. So that's, again, around 75% of people. Look at sexual orientation. 28% a strong automatic preference for straight people compared to gay people, 25% a moderate automatic preference, and 15% a slight automatic preference. Around 70% total. And then looking at race, we have 27% a strong automatic preference for white people compared to black people, 27% a moderate automatic preference, and 16% a slight automatic preference. And you see there, you know, if you see at the bottom, they also talk, there are some people who have a automatic preference for black people compared to white people. There's a small percent of people who have a automatic preference for gay people compared to straight people, etc. I thought this was another interesting one. So in terms of race and weapons, there's a strong automatic association of blacks with weapons and whites with harmless objects in 23% of the people who have completed this assessment. 30% have a moderate automatic association of blacks with weapons and whites with harmless objects, and 19% a slight automatic association of blacks with weapons. And so what could this lead to? If you have, you know, someone who's a police officer, or even someone who's observing an incident and calling the police, and if you've got an implicit association of blacks with weapons and whites with harmless objects, you're more likely, if you're a police officer, to assume that what you see in that black person's hand is a weapon as opposed to what you see in that white person's hand as a weapon. And even if you're an observer, you're more likely to report to the police that what you see in the black person's hand is a weapon compared to what you see in the white person's hand. And of course, we know that that often leads to devastating consequences. When you think about gender roles, strong automatic association of males with science and females with liberal arts. So you've got, again, 70-something% of people who strongly associate males with science and females with liberal arts just automatically, unconsciously. Strong automatic association of male with career and female with family. Again, this is, very high percentage of people have this, whether it's strong, moderate, or slight, but have an automatic association of males with career and females with family. Looking at religion, ethnicity, Arab Americans, so we have 12% of the web respondents showed a strong automatic preference for other people compared to Arab Muslims. 20% had a moderate automatic preference and 18% a slight automatic preference. And so there are other areas, but with limited time today, I picked some that I thought would be very interesting and showed the very high levels of implicit bias by people, even the people who complete this test, which really is it's not really a good cross-section of the American population, because it's only people who are aware that this is an issue and who are interested in finding out about their own implicit biases. So this is the website for Project Implicit, and you can continue as a guest to find out your implicit associations about race, gender, sexual orientation, etc. There's also a Project Implicit Mental Health, which finds out implicit associations about self-esteem, anxiety, alcohol, etc. And then, another Project Implicit feature task. So, I just think that, using that assessment as a tool to help identify your own implicit biases is a really important first step to be able to do the hard work that's required to address your own implicit biases and work with others within your organization and community to address implicit biases. So again, I'm closing with some, I think, really important messages around how people are perceived and how we often have to work hard to overcome those implicit biases so that we don't make judgments or treat people in negative ways because of those implicit biases. And so now I'm going to see if there are any questions that anybody has about the presentation.
Okay, well, thank you, Diana.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Clark. I'm glad you're here today, and thank you for having me. I am the medical case manager at Catholic Charities Refugee Resettlement Program. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Thank you. I'm used to wandering, so I'll try to stay put. I'm the medical case manager at Catholic Charities Refugee Resettlement Program here in Nashville. Due to all of the political changes, we did have 3 refugee resettlement agencies in Nashville. World Relief was one of them, and they had to close down because of the situations. I know that NICE, National International Center for Empowerment, they lost a few people. We lost 13 people to layoffs. And so this is a good time to do some speaking and help you understand what we do and answer any questions that you can have. If I don't know the answer to a question and I need to find out, is it okay to let you, Megan, know, and then you can share with everyone? Okay, great. So that's what we'll do. All right, so let's get going. I've got a PowerPoint explaining refugee resettlement, and then towards the end, I'll discuss some barriers or challenges that I have as a medical case manager trying to help my clients get medical care. All right, who are refugees? What do we mean when we say refugees? The term immigrant, you hear a lot of these words, could be from any different reasons. What we focus on is specifically the category of refugee status. A refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution, war, or violence, including torture and rape. A refugee has a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Most likely they cannot return home or are afraid to do so. So these are not people who decided they want to find another place to live. It's not even people who are in impoverished lands. These are people who their lives are in danger, and if they can't get out, they will die. Imminently die. Refugee versus immigrants. I took some notes. This PowerPoint is from one of my coworkers who has a mind of steel and can remember lots of facts. I'm not as good with that, so I've got a few notes to help me through her parts of this. In World War II, just a little history, that's when what we consider the modern refugee resettlement effort. The Displaced Persons Act of 1948, that is to allow some of the Europeans who were in Nazi Germany who were being displaced to come to the United States. The Refugee Act of 1980 was after the Vietnam War, when we had a lot of Vietnamese and Cambodians fleeing their country, and that allowed some of them to come here during that time. Who are refugees? So nationally, refugees are primarily children under 18, 51%. 3% are elders, seniors over the age of 60. The remaining 46% are adults age 18 to 59. Where did they come from? 79 different nationalities were resettled in the U.S. in 2014, and as you know, with the political ban, they're trying to get certain countries to not come to the United States, so that will affect this if that goes through. In 2016, the largest refugee population, Democratic Republic of Congo, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Burma, and Bhutan. And just to give you an idea, as providers, the languages that you're looking at for these countries, Congolese, they tend to speak Kinyarwanda, Kiswahili, Kinyamalinj, French, Kirundi. Iraq, they can speak Arabic, Kurdish, or Farsi. And if I miss anything, let me know. This is not necessarily my strength. Syria, a lot of them speak Arabic. We've got Somali language. The Burmese, a lot of them speak Burmese, but a lot of them don't. There's a lot of variations of what we call Chin, C-H-I-N. They may speak one Chin, but not another Chin. And so if you have an interpreter that speaks one Chin, it might not be the Chin that language that client needs. Nepali for the Bhutanese. And so lots of different languages that can be a barrier when you're trying to seek medical care. And they may not be literate in their language. And so when they come, they may not even be able to sign their name. Okay. How are they screened, and what do resettlement agencies do in the resettlement process? I know we hear a lot about vetting in the political arena right now, and hopefully this will give some information. The clients must apply for refugee status with UNHCR, and I should have written that down, United Nations. My mind can't even go there right now, I apologize. Once verified, security checks begin. The U.S. refugee program has the most stringent screening process, and that's what they are calling vetting, the vetting process of any country who accepts refugees. It's a multi-agency coordinated process headed by Homeland Security, but also includes the FBI, National Counterterrorism Center, and other agencies. How does a refugee end up in Nashville? If a refugee passes all of the security checks, their file is sent to Washington, D.C. And if at any point in this process that could take several years, if they have something like, say they wrote their name differently than what was on file, anything that throws up red flags, they have to stop and go all the way back to the screening process and start again. 9 national resettlement agencies called VOLAGs, volunteer agencies, review the files and decide which one is going to accept the case, the family or the client that's coming. The VOLAG that accepts the case decides where that family will resettle based on consultations with local agencies like Catholic Charities of Tennessee. Parameters include, this is what we're looking at when we're going to accept the case. I'm going to stay close to the microphone. Because if we're going to resettle somebody, we want to make sure we have the resources to resettle them well and make sure they can become self-sufficient. And so we're looking at the size of the case, how many people are in the family, what languages are available. Do we have that language available so that we can communicate to them when they come? Existing refugee communities, there's a strong Somali community, a Kurdish community. Even if someone is coming and they don't have a family, if there's a strong community here, that's a good thing that they can have help with. Medical needs are important. Thankfully, Nashville has a very strong medical community. But we need to make sure, do they have family and friends here? Are they going to be all by themselves and they have a major chronic medical condition that they're going to need help with? That's going to affect if they don't have someone who can take them back and forth, someone who can stay with them at night if they need it. So we have to look at all those factors when we're going to resettle someone. What happens next? Refugee is notified of the resettlement city that they're going to. They will receive a health screening. In Nashville, Salome Family Health Center is the one who does our medical screenings. They're actually in charge of the results of the medical screening throughout Tennessee, but they actually see the clients here in Nashville. And it's a 2-part where they go through their immunizations, make sure they have all the immunizations, any medical care that they need. They don't address it during the medical screening, but they'll identify it and create a plan for the future. The clients will participate in cultural orientation sessions, things that we take for granted. For instance, one time we had a party at Lowe's welcoming everybody, and they had the water fountains like you do here where it's automatic. And they had lived in a refugee camp, and a client came up to me. She's like, how do I get water? Like, she didn't know. There are so many things we take for granted that we do every day. And the cultural orientation helps them to understand, okay, in America, this is how you do this is how you do that, to help them get where they need to go and do what they need to do. So their flight is booked. One thing people may not know, once they get here and they start working, they have to pay for their flight. They have to pay that back. Agency is notified of travel date and prepares for refugee arrival. Before arrival, the apartment is secured. So we get the apartments ready for them so that when they get here, they can go right in. Furnished with furniture. Furniture is all donated. Pots and pans, everything donated. A hot meal is prepared or purchased for the family. A lot of times we'll get somebody from their community to give them a hot meal so it'll be the food that they're used to eating. The day of arrival, greeted at the airport by staff and volunteers, transported to their new apartment. This will be the case managers a lot of times that will do that. Now that we have laid off 13 people, it could be any of us. All of us are kind of helping with that process. They will receive home and safety orientation. Thank you. I thought I dropped something. Just for the there you go. Receive a home and safety orientation, checking how to use the thermostat, the smoke detector, hot water, locking doors, operation of stove, especially if they've been in a refugee camp for years. They have not had any of these, just how to flush a toilet. They just have not had that experience. And then enjoying the first hot meal in their new country. After arrival, they're going to have the comprehensive medical screening that I talked about, the 2-part screening. For all refugees that resettle, they're eligible for a brief period of time of some type of cash assistance, and both of them are programs to give temporary cash assistance so that they can start working. And so if it's based on the fact that we're guiding them to get their documents, get a job, get working, and get off the financial assistance as soon as possible. The adults will attend English class, help them learn English as quickly as possible. We enroll the children in school. The adults, as I said, will prepare to work, having to get their documents first. Adults will secure employment and eventually become self-sufficient. Benefits, as I said, cash assistance is one. We have initial resettlement funds, resettlement and placement funds is RMP, just to get them here, get them into the housing. The refugee cash assistance or the match grant are the two programs that are based on working. You get this limited amount of money to help you while you're getting a job. Families First is through the Department of Health and Human Services. And so that's eligible depending on the parameters of theirs. So that's not a Catholic Charities program. Medical assistance, that's more of what I do. We have, if they are a family and they're eligible for TennCare, like if they have children under 18 or if a lady is pregnant, they'll be eligible for TennCare as long as their income, once they start working, they can be kicked off because of income. Refugee medical assistance, TOR is Tennessee Office for Refugees. It's funded by them. They pay the premiums for that. These are for people who are over 18 and single, not pregnant, no children. And that's a temporary insurance policy that lasts up to 8 months after their arrival in the United States. It's a very temporary plan. It doesn't really have to meet the qualifications of like the Affordable Care Act. So there are things that they can exclude. There's a benefit cap, but it's enough for an emergency type situation to help them while they're getting a job. All right, agencies, case management, all of the things that I've talked about that we have to do for the clients coming in, case managers do that. I am more, like I said, the medical, so if they have severe medical chronic problems that are gonna affect the resettlement process, then I'll get involved with that. We enroll the children in school, plus a parent and student orientation. So we educate, everything that they need to know to be here in America. Cultural and employment orientations. The employment program, we have an entire employment staff whose sole focus is to get jobs. We look at the skills that they have in their country. The unfortunate thing is World Relief had what was called the REACH program, R-E-A-C-H, and that was for people who had were lawyers, doctors, like had institutional training and degrees in their country. You can't just work here when you first get here. You actually have to go through a long process to recertify yourself. Sometimes you have to go back to school, and that program is no longer because World Relief is gone. And so that can be difficult. A lot of these people who have been doctors and lawyers are having to work in a chicken factory because that's the only job they can get when they first get here. But they have to create that, establish their work history, and then decide what they need to do to be able to get back in their field. Elders program, we have a great elders program at Catholic Charities. As with all elders in America as well, they're not necessarily going to work, they're sitting at home, their family may be at work, and so it's a great program for them to not only learn about America, but to be together with other people, and it's got people from all different cultures and languages in that program. We have a youth program, we have an after-school program, we have a program that helps the children before they've gotten their immunizations and haven't been enrolled in school yet. The health promotion, that is through Siloam Family Health Center. And if they have intensive case management problems, medical problems, they will pick up them. And they'll also do what's a health literacy class, where they're teaching them American healthcare so that they can understand how to do health insurance, when to go to the emergency room, when not to go to the emergency room, that type of thing. And then community partnerships with volunteers. We rely so much on volunteers. We have so many wonderful people that will come and help mentor and do all kinds of things to help out. All right, ways to help. I just mentioned some of them. Be an advocate for refugee rights. Right now, as you know, politically, there's a lot of things going on to portray a negative image of refugees and what they supposedly are doing to the country. And so that's why we want the education, teach people, you know, what is a refugee? Make sure that we've got facts that are being transmitted and not fears. Stay informed, help dispel misconceptions in your community. Mentor, we have a mentor program at Catholic Charities. If you want to mentor anyone and help them, it's kind of an added, we do the cultural orientation and all, but it's like a part when they first get here and do it, but then they have every day that they're living here. And when you're a mentor, you can get in there and kind of be with them in the everyday things and say, okay, let's go get some ice cream. Let's go teach you how to ride a bus. Let's go do all this type of stuff. Tutors, we use a lot of tutors as far as teaching English. Sometimes they're resettled in a home that's a little bit far. It's like 1 or 2 miles from an English class. And so we can have English tutors that can actually go in the home and teach them English. Driving, transportation is a huge thing, especially now that we've lost so many people. We have multiple visits that they have to go to, whether it's medical screenings, going to get their Social Security card, all of these transports that we need every day. That's a huge need that we have. Translation, anybody who speaks languages, obviously with all the languages that I mentioned, most of our staff can do it, but they also have a full caseload, and so they're driving around trying to help people, and we've got somebody that needs interpretation. And so that's always a need as well. And of course, donations, not just financially, but if there's any equipment, any household furnishings, coats, hats, of course, it's getting a little bit warmer now, so coats may not be needed at this time. And then financial, if you feel led to do that. And so now I thought I would go through some of the barriers and challenges that I've had trying to get medical care for our clients. The majority of our clients are healthy, and a lot of people, just like the rest of us, they might have high blood pressure, diabetes, but it's controlled on medication. But occasionally we will get people with severe, we've had people with muscular dystrophy, people with spina bifida, people with gunshot wounds. I had one gentleman that had been left to die where he had a bullet that was still in his brain because he had never gotten a surgery. And I think one thing that happens with the medical care, especially if they're in camps, they just have not even basic first aid. And so they've been there 10, 15 years and not gotten the care they need. So when they get here, they may not even know that they have a medical disorder like cancer or something like that, and then they find that out and then have to be treated. So they may not have ever received treatment or just minor treatment. Some of the countries, such as Iraq, they had a medical system that was similar to ours, but now that they've had bombs and everything's been blown up, they don't have access to medical care. They don't have the buildings to be able to treat the people. And so the people might be more aware of their medical condition, but they've not had the access to take care of it. And so let me get to my notes. There's probably, I wrote down just a few things that I see. For the most part, we have found just the most wonderful medical providers in Nashville. Like I said, everybody knows what great medical care we have in Nashville. And we have quite a few that will bend over backwards to try to work with these barriers, but we still have a lot of people, and I think this is a good presentation as far as bias. People that are not necessarily meaning to cause difficulty with medical care with refugees, but there are some issues that are going on and it makes it hard to receive medical care. And so I'll just kind of go through. I obviously can't say if someone has bias or not. I know we all have bias, but I'll just kind of share the struggles that I have, and you can kind of think to yourself how that looks like as far as the implicit bias. Language, as I mentioned, so many languages, that is a huge barrier. Most of our specialists that we go to that are able to take the health insurances that our clients have don't have interpreters. Some of them do, but most of them don't. We have actually had neurologists and such specialists that refuse to work with our clients. I had one gentleman, I believe it was the one with the bullet in his eye. She did not work with a lot of refugees, so she didn't have interpreters, didn't have the ability to do a phone interpretation. And so she relied on us to bring interpreters. And we do the best we can, but like I said, oftentimes the people that have the language the best and know the best about American healthcare have a full caseload and they're driving around trying to help people. So a lot of times when that happens, we'll have to get somebody either in the community or in the family. And on that day, the man who came for the surgery to help interpret, he had to go to work at a certain time. And so it was running over and he had to go to work. And so the doctor from the recovery room called me on the phone and basically yelled at me and cussed at me for like 5 minutes saying, well, why didn't you have an interpreter? Why didn't you do that? And so it's like our desire is to try to get them the best care possible. And because we didn't have the institutionalized, trained healthcare interpreters, it broke down, and the one that we were able to find wasn't able to stay there the whole time. And so it was not the best care for that client, which is what we were all concerned about, including the surgeon. It was her frustration because she wanted to give good care. And I know there's several places around town who train, and a trained medical interpreter is amazing, the difference in, because not only do they have the cultural awareness of the community they're from, they have the language, they know those nuances of the words that maybe that word doesn't translate very well, but they've also been taught medical terminology. So when you get somebody like that, it's incredible the care that you can get. But they cost a lot of money. It can cost up to $80 an hour. Language line oftentimes can cost almost $2 a minute. And so you can see where a provider is coming at it from a financial standpoint, that's very difficult for them. And so that's definitely probably one of the main problems that we have. Another example, I was with a client who was having a surgery on her ear, and that interpreter was a son who woke up late and got there late. And so while she was getting ready to go into surgery, they just called someone on the interpreting line. And those are trained interpreters, but you're not face to face. So you don't necessarily see all the facial expressions. And somehow it was misinterpreted that they thought the lady was being beaten by her husband. And in the process, we are being pulled aside. Now, once she's gone into the surgery, I've made that move again. Let me do that. Once she goes into the surgery, I have to sit with the social worker and the family to discuss this. And of course, we knew the family, we knew the situation because we've been working with her. And we're able to help them understand that it was a miscommunication, that she is in a very safe relationship and is not having domestic violence issues. And of course, it was right for them to follow up on that, because if it was, they definitely needed to help with that. And so language can definitely be a barrier that can cause problems. And transportation, as mentioned, transportation can be very difficult because in order with the traffic, you all know that the traffic can be very tough around here. You may have to leave an hour early just to get somewhere that's 15 minutes down the road, make sure they get there in time. And medical appointments, a lot of times they're back to back every 15 minutes. So if you're late, you mess up the doctor's schedule and it causes problems. And so we might have somebody that needs to go on every end of the county. A case manager might have somebody that needs to go here, there, everywhere. And like the other day, I had like 6 people that had to be in this different places across town at the same time. And I'm like, oh, we need drivers. And so that's definitely a barrier. If they're eligible for TennCare, you have TennCare transportation. And that's very helpful, although sometimes they'll just kind of come around to the opening of the apartment complex, and if they're not standing right there, they'll leave the client. And since the client can't speak, I hope that's not hurting your ears with that noise. If the client can't speak English, to say, oh, wait a minute, I'm the one you're supposed to pick up, then they end up getting missed. And then the ones that are on the refugee medical assistance, the insurance that Tennessee Office of Refugee provides, they don't have transportation with that. And religious considerations, we have people from almost every religion you can think of. And sometimes, as far as food products, not only Muslim, but Hindu, there are several different, like vitamins. I even have one of my coworkers that lost her job. There are even vitamins and such that they cannot have because it has pork products in it. And so when a medical provider is saying, okay, you need this medicine, you need to take these vitamins, do all that, that's a barrier that we need to make sure there's education involved so that the provider understands the needs of the client. Male, female is, for one instance, we have, when we have a lady who is pregnant, if she is Muslim, she prefers a female provider, and correct me if I'm wrong about any of this, we can get a female provider, but what happens in the very last moment that she goes into labor and then her doctor is not on call, and so now we've got on-call situations, she's going to the hospital and it's a man. And so there's situations like that to be thought of. Literacy, as I said, I do a lot of the medical bills, and I can say I don't do them very successful. the literacy problem, if someone can't sign their name, we're used to just telling them we'll do an X. Like some countries, when they're being verified at identity to come over here, they use a fingerprint. All they have to do is put their fingerprint and then they know who they are. But here, you got to sign your name, and you usually have to sign it on that little electric thing that doesn't even look like a piece of paper. And so I've actually had release of information forms, HIPAA forms, that were denied because it had an X on it, or because you couldn't really read the signature, because the client wasn't really literate, wasn't able to do that, and we were trying our best to get them to sign their name. I had one, I was trying to deal with a medical bill on the backside, calling in, and I faxed them our HIPAA release form signed by the client when they first got there, but then they had learned English, done a little bit better with their signature. So the last time they went in there, their signature didn't look like the signature initially, but it was the same client, and she refused to speak to me, and so I couldn't help with the medical bills because of that situation. Let's see, what's another? Okay, and speaking of medical bills, I think that HIPAA is different, not only the signature, but a lot of times, like I guess with all of us really, we have names that we prefer to call ourselves. If we go somewhere, you fill out your name, date of birth, all of that type of thing. If someone's coming in and they've gone to the emergency room or something like that when they first get here, they're not speaking English yet. They've got someone who's taking them, they're scared, they're having a medical problem. Well, a lot of times the person with them is trying to help, and they're trying to write their name and address, and they might spell it wrong, or they might put their address instead of the address that they have. So then later on, if the medical bill comes and we have to resolve the medical bill, a lot of places they need 3 forms of identification to prove that you are who you say you are, because obviously you don't want to be sharing private medical information with just anybody, so you want to make sure who you're talking to. But that can be a very big barrier. When I've got, the other day, I have a client sitting here with me with her relative who's interpreting, and she had her daughter put the daughter's phone number, the daughter's address, because that's where she was living at the time. So we couldn't get 3 forms of identification that matched, and she didn't have a social security yet, so apparently somebody just put like zeros in the computer. So we couldn't verify her, but she's sitting here right with me. I know that this is the person and this is her medical bill. So now her medical bill, a year later, we're still trying to fight the medical bill that's gone into collections when she doesn't even owe any money. And I'd like to just tell them that, but they won't talk to me because they can't verify her identity. And so you can kind of see, you're seeing my bias. I'm seeing it from my side and what we struggle with our clients trying to help them. But you can also see the medical providers, they don't want to get in trouble and then tell the wrong person all this private information. You know, they don't want to deal with medical bills and all this if they don't know who they are. So you can see both sides. It can cause a lot of challenge. And I think that's why some medical providers, they just don't want to deal with it. It's too much. And so they just don't work with our clients, and which is unfortunate, because it's not only are you denying people care that they need, but what a wealth of knowledge and benefit that you can gain. That reminds me, I'll end on a positive note. We had a client who had cancer. He had stage 4 tongue and neck cancer when he got here, and he had no idea that he had cancer. He just had a few headaches, and that was it. And very quiet, very passive. It's just whatever the doctors wanted to do. You know, with the radiation, they have to put that thing, cage-like thing. I'm sorry, I don't know the correct terminology. Just all of that he went through. He had a very specific language that only one member in his family could help interpret. They couldn't even get it on language line. And this medical provider, all the way through that process, in which he ended up dying because it was stage 4 and they did the best they could, the entire community, so to speak, of medical providers who was helping them were so touched by his gentleness, by his caring, and learned so much from him when they never spoke a word face-to-face, English to English. They actually went back not long after he died, did a ground rounds, and so invited everybody to come, and they talked so wonderfully about this beautiful experience they had with this person, and they wished it had been a better outcome. They wished they could have saved his life, but they had been touched so much by working with this client, and they never even were able to communicate face-to-face, one-on-one. And so I've given a lot of information, and as I said, if I can't answer your question now, I'll get with Megan and get the answers to her. I have lots of people that I work with that can answer what I don't know. So right now, am I running over time or am I doing okay? Okay. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask.
Hello, my name is Jeff Gibson. I'm a sergeant with Metro PD. I am assigned to the Hermitage evening shift. That's my primary assignment. I'm also a member of the crisis negotiator team. As part of that team and that training, we have reached out and just recently I was able to put on a crisis intervention training. That's kind of like a police model on responding to persons in a some sort of crisis situation, emotional distress situation. Additional part of that, an additional part of that training was to further go into different mental illnesses and other situations that the police can be presented with to help us try to more completely understand the situation that we're being presented with. Not just along with the crisis intervention training, we have cultural awareness training, the mental illness training as part, with the academy and the recruits. And we've also had the implicit bias training, very similar to what was just presented here today. And again, to go back to the crisis intervention training, we've reached out to NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, Catholic Charities, the Nashville, the Mental Health Co-op here, as well as the Triad Group, which kind of put me in contact to be here today, and specifically with the autism training. And to go back to the earlier point of kind of this training is to help the police understand the situation more thoroughly so we can do our job, because the law is black and white, and we don't get to apply it favorably or as we choose to. It is what it is. So if we can understand what the situation is, it helps us be able to do our job more effectively. Does anybody have any questions for me that I might be able to assist with, or any questions maybe on police response to certain situations or anything? Yes, ma'am.
Could you talk about how bias training has affected sort of what you do every day in the car, on the street, how that's changed? I don't know when that was implemented, but how it has changed perspective in terms of the police department.
The question was like, how has the implicit bias training kind of changed more or less the day-to-day kind of operations with everything, or at least how maybe personally how I view it. Personally, I can say that I always try to just apply the law absolutely fairly, unbiasedly to it, without, because you take somebody as an individual, as a person, then you take whatever statute or law is going to be applicable to the situation, and you just weigh those two and other factors such as where someone's from, someone's race, any of those other situations. They don't factor into it. They can't factor into it. It wouldn't be fair to allow that to factor into it or not. Now, whether or not the implicit bias training for me is just kind of like a revelation of like, oh, wow, I've been doing this, or we've been doing this wrong all along. The way that our implicit bias training was, it's not do this differently. It's a recognition of, hey, this could be influencing your thoughts. This could be in the background of what's going on. And we just want to make sure you're aware that that could be there, and to make sure that that is not what we are allowing to influence any decisions that we're making.
I guess what brought that to my mind was a child who might not realize, say, on the autism spectrum, perhaps, might not realize there's a law is black and white.
Mm-hmm.
That child or teenager might not recognize that they are in fact breaking the law. They might be unprotected, alone, out somewhere. How are you able to determine that when applying the law? Because
Right.
that's a unique and sort of, I would imagine, for you to protect that child would be
Right.
in your
And I'll try to paraphrase her question. More or less, I think it would boil down to if you have a situation such as an autistic child who might not be aware, legally culpable, I guess would be a good way to put it. And they might not be aware that they're actually committing a crime, and how would we deal with that? That would go back to the training that we are receiving to try to make a determination on what is it that we're dealing with. You know, to be able to identify there's something that's not right with this person, okay? And what is wrong with them? Are we dealing with someone who's autistic and just is kind of standoffish with police? To be able to make the best decision on how to proceed forward with it. Now, if there's a situation that, without trying to get into too specific of a situation, where we don't know what's going on, and sometimes if we have to make an arrest, there have been times that I've been a part of making an arrest where you do have a statute that's fulfilled, but the ultimate goal of the arrest isn't a punishment, but it's to try to keep that person safe. And so they're going to be safe where we take them, and then to jail. And at least it's going to get them off the street so they can't be victimized by somebody else. And then, but as far as the police response, it's satisfied because we did act within the law. But if we can identify that there is some sort of a mental health issue going on, then we can try to explore that avenue first. We can go with the mental health co-op. We can try to get the mental health or whatever medical is, address that issue first. But if we're not able to address it that way, if we're unable to, it's like someone with autism who's obviously a danger to themselves or others, and mobile crisis or a mental health co-op, if they're going to be unable to assist us in that situation, then as a police department, we have to make sure this individual is safe. And if the only way we have to make sure the individual is safe is to take him to jail, we've already explored the other route, and those doors aren't opening for us. So we still have to keep the person safe.
All right. My name is Officer Ramirez. I am in charge of a program called the El Protector program, the Protector, in Spanish, El Protector. The purpose of this program, it started in 2004, but the founder of this event, this outreach program, was down in California, which is called the California Highway Patrol. Anybody saw that program, CHIPS? All right, so that's where it came from, not from those officers, but from the agency. The reason why they started the program is because a lot of the Hispanics, anybody ever been to any Latin American country? How many? Guys gone there, drink some good beer? Margaritas and all that good stuff? No margaritas? None of that? Okay, just sightseeing, right? That's what I do. I do sightseeing, you know? But other than that, they had a lot of issues with the Hispanic community due to the culture of drinking. So there was a lot of fatalities. So for them to be able to educate the community about don't drink and drive, they created this program. We copied their program, but we're unique, right? Because we're Nashvillians, right? So we copy there, but we add some little flavor to it. And we'll talk about what the different flavor we added that made the program very successful from 2004 until now. You sure I can't stay? I gotta stay here? Okay, no problem. Anybody wanted to give it a shot to read this for me? Anybody raise your hand? Sure, go ahead.
The program has been designed to fully integrate the microphone.
Oh, you can? Oh, then come up here, come up here, come up here. Come on. This is, of course. There we go, there we go.
I'm shorter than you are.
That's all right.
The El Protector program has been designed to fully integrate the MNPD community-oriented policing services, COPS, philosophy to engage the Hispanic/Latino community in Nashville and Davidson County, Tennessee, in reducing DUIs, traffic fatalities, domestic violence, and in crime prevention.
There you go. You have won an El Protector soccer ball. See that? There's more prizes. Anybody want to volunteer to be Vanna White? Hey, you'll get one. And anyone that wants to be his co-partner. What's that guy's name? What's his name? You could be him also, and you get a prize too. All right. Before we start with the program, let's give a little history about the Hispanic community, okay? In the Hispanic community, we have different culture. We got the northern part, which is Mexico. They don't consider themselves Central, South, or anything. They consider themselves Mexico. So as you can see, some of us been to Mexico, right? I haven't so far. I'm still waiting for them to buy me a plane ticket. I'll be glad to visit. But we have gone Mexico. Another one is Central America. Central America, as you can see, there's different parts. You got Honduras, Guatemala, Belize, Nicaragua, Costa Rica. Been there. Anybody been to Costa Rica? Beautiful. Beautiful place. Especially if you're a surfer. Excellent place to go. Then Panama. Anybody been to Panama? I seen the canal. Great place to be. Then you continue going straight down, and guess where you wind up? South America. South America, you got Brazil, you got Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Chile, and on, right? So you got those areas. But does the Hispanic community ends there? No, because we got the islands. We got Cuba. Hey, we got Puerto Rico. All right. And then you got the Dominican Republic. Any shout out? There you go. So those are all the islands, but next to the Dominican Republic, you know, you have Haiti. Okay. Now, before we became Hispanics, we got to go way, 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 way back. We were never Hispanics. We were Indians, native Indians. Okay. And that's what we were. We were native Indians, so we never spoke the language Spanish. We didn't even know what "cómo está" means, or "ven aquí," or "hola," "bienvenido." We didn't know any of that stuff. We spoke the language that we spoke, which is native tongue. But then suddenly, the motherland of Spain came along and went out there to see how the water was, just to see how deep it is, right? That's what we learned in history, right? I guess so, right? Sometimes I fell asleep half of the time, but I was there. But guess what other companion they had in their ship? Anybody has an idea? Besides a Hispanic? Who was, right, besides Christopher, who else was occupying these ships? But there were more. There was not just one. There was a group of them. Anybody? Get it? I know you want to raise your hand, ma'am. Go ahead. I know you know it. Do you know the answer?
I was going to say diseases.
Nope. Nope, not the church. It was one ethnic group that was with them. Who said African? There you go. Whoa. There you go. Correct. You had the Africans that was with the Spaniards. They went out there. They conquered, occupied all these islands. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we are. We are a mixture of three cultures: Spaniard, Native Indians, and African. Okay, so that way, if you see an African person and start speaking Spanish, it's not because he married to a Hispanic person, it's because it's migraine. Okay, now we do have Hispanics do marry African, because my aunt did marry a black man from Mississippi. He's a truck driver, and they've been married for almost 50 years, and they have 6 kids. So I'm glad they were my cousins, because when I went to California, they saved me from many robberies. You know what I'm saying? So, but that's the good thing, you know? But I'm glad that they are my cousins, and I praise them. And the same thing, I had a grandfather that is half African and half Puerto Rican. And many people used to tell me in New York, who's this guy? They thought he was a pedophile or something. Say, why? He can't be my son? He cannot be next to me? So you know what I'm saying? So that's why. So we have a mixture. And these are all the country that the Spaniards conquered that made a migraine of 3 cultures. The only one that is not mixed very well is Cuba. Cuba is a mixture of two cultures because they slaughter all the Indians in that island. Am I right?
The Spanish did, not the Cuban.
Right. So that's why there's a mixture of only two cultures. It's Spaniard and the Africans. That's why in Cuba, you got what they call, the part is called Santiago de Cuba. That's mostly majority are African, and they follow the African culture. So that's why they're into the drumming, into the white clothing. They're into Santeria, which is voodoo. So they're heavily into that. The same thing with the Puerto Ricans, okay? So these are all the different countries that Spain occupied. These are the different culture dance. You got on the one on the far top, Salvadorian. The middle is Colombia. On the top right is Mexico. Bottom, Puerto Rico. The middle, which culture you think that is? The Philippines. The Philippines don't stay behind, okay, because they were occupied by the Spaniards. And then you got the Aztec Indians, which is Mexico. All right, so those are the different cultures, and there's many more because Honduras has their culture, the Cubans have their cultures, everyone has their culture of dancing. All right, those are the beautiful flags with the mother flag on top, but also we got the Philippines. Okay, remember the Philippines is also part Hispanic. Why? Because they were occupied almost 400 years by the Spaniards. After that, it was the Americans. That's why a lot of the Philippines are able to speak English. Then during World War II, guess who occupied them again? Not again, but who occupied them? The Japanese. Then you have now people from China, Korea, and different culture that settles in the Philippines. Okay, but technically their culture are really Malaysian and Indonesia. So the south part of the Philippines are very heavily populated Muslim. Okay, due to the fact because Indonesia and what you call it, Malaysians and Indonesia. Okay, now tell me, to win the prizes, who occupied Brazil? Who has an idea? Whoever didn't win, the man in the back. The Portuguese, come on down. Now you're gonna win a police car, but I'm gonna give you a badge, but please, don't go out there stopping anybody now, okay? Because I have to swear you in, and the mayor's not here today, okay? There you go. All right. Now, who was Belize? Who occupied Belize? Anybody has an idea? Nope. No. Who say English? Who you want to give that prize to? All right, come on down. Here you go. You want a police car or what?
Oh, this works.
All right. And finally, who occupied Haiti? The French. Who say French? There's several. That's okay. Guess what? I got plenty. Who said French? All right, that's correct. Belize was occupied by the English. Who said what? Some more. And that is correct. That police car. See? I guess this presentation is pretty good, right? Yeah. All right, so that's, sorry. It's so exciting, giving away prizes. Oh, you too. Oh, I'm sorry. There you go. Está bien. Okay. All right, now the El Protector program. Let's talk about this real quick because we're running out of time. The El Protector program, the reason why we do this because the increased population of the Hispanic community. Not only that, but multicultural are coming in here. The reason why we start this program because of the fear of police. My job is to interact with the community and to educate. Educate. That's important. And this is the reason why. Our program is to find a way to straighten the community with the police and to show them that we're here for them. Doesn't make a difference if you're documented or undocumented. Doesn't make a difference if you came from the south part of this country or the north part. or the east or the west. If you're gonna occupy or reside in this county, we just want you to do certain things. It's to obey the laws. And what the laws are, driving. We educate them about DUI, the importance why you should not be drinking and driving. How to be driving in a proper way without hurting anyone while other people are driving. The rules of the roads, traffic stop, seatbelt, that's a major issue. A lot of these countries don't have seatbelts. They don't have car seats. We educate them the importance why they have to have it. Okay, driver's license. We tell them that they have to have it. Sad to say that the state of Tennessee at this present time, they're not issuing license, but hopefully one day they will, because they used to at one time and they took it off because of a situation, but that's a long story. How to present themselves when a police officer stopped them. But what we ask for them, their driver's license, registration, insurance. If you don't have a license, then show me something to identify who you are. That way we could do what we need to do. But if you cannot present who you are, then sad to say we have to take you to jail. Why? Because we don't know your identity. So that's why we tell them, we educate them, we tell all these things to them. Another thing is domestic violence. We educate them that you don't beat your woman. Maybe you do that in your own culture, at your own country, but here there's laws. We educate them what they need to do, how to do it, and we educate them if you are a victim of a domestic, who to contact, and et cetera, et cetera. Sex crime. We educate the adults that way. If you're having a relationship with someone under the age of 18, we're not in the countryside. This is not your country for you to be doing this. Here we have laws. You have to be careful. We educate them. Communicating with a woman under the age of 18 is okay. But when you go beyond that, that's an issue. Okay, so we educate them because we understand that their culture don't allow them to do these things, but here in this country, you cannot do that. So it's all about education. Issue with juveniles. The kids know that their parents are undocumented. They scare them. They threaten them for them to be able to do things out there. And we tell them, you have the right to spank your child. You have the right to discipline your child. You have those rights. Now, the only rights that you don't have in the older days, which happened to me, is you whip your kid until blood comes out. Nope, that's not allowed anymore. Or put them in the corner with a Bible in your hand and some rice on, and you kneel on it. Those type of punishment doesn't exist anymore. But you have the rights to spank a child. You have the right to take certain privileges away from these kids when they get to a certain age. We educate them that because they have parental rights. So we educate them. And the only good thing about that is we do this through the radio station. We do this through the newspaper. I do mega amounts of community outreach to educate, because education is the most important thing that we have to do. These people come here without knowing what the policies and the laws of this land. But if we punish them without knowing, how they're gonna know? So, but when you educate them, then they know. Then there's no excuse, okay? So that's why I spend a lot of time in the radio station. That's why I spend a lot of time doing things in the newspaper. That's why I spend time a lot in different community outreach, different festivals, different events to educate, because education is the most important thing. That way they understand when they come here, they came here because of opportunities. They came here for a better life, and especially to give a good education to those kids that they know that it's hard to give to these kids. Why? Because they don't live in the Philippines, which is free. They don't live in Cuba, which is communist, but education is free. They don't live in America because it's free. These countries, you gotta pay for these education. So I make sure that these youth understand that, because sometimes I have to become counselors for these kids. So to educate them why they have that privilege and they should never take that for granted. So I make sure they live the life of their parents and understand that their education is very important. So we continue doing all this. I've been doing the El Protector program for 2008. My first festival became 2009, and I do the festival every single year and has been doing it for the past 9 years. We invite vendors to come out to interact with the community, to let the community know we have the services here to give to you. So I do also baby shower, which is coming up now in April 22nd. We educate mamas to be how to take care of their children, how to make sure they're healthy, making sure that if a child has a disability or anything, we have agencies there to be able to reach out to them. That way, when that comes about, they know who to go to. It's all about networking because everyone is on the same ship and is trying to give the same message. So that's why I bring these agencies with me to be able to explore the water of all these culture, and that way they're educated in case something happens later on. So I've been doing it for this long. Also, what we do is finally, it stopped, but hopefully one day it continue. We used to do a Christmas party for the children with disability needs. To me, it's dearly because I understand that these kids don't have the privilege to go to these festivals because they're afraid, parents are afraid that some of these kids are gonna make fun of them. So that's why we did in the past a Christmas party, especially for them. Okay, that way they could enjoy the gifts and the present. And thanks to Cecilia that helped me out a great deal for several years to make this happen. And I hope in the future we could do it again. So we do these kind of things. We do soccer tournament. We do summer camps for these kids. And we don't do it just for one culture. We do it for multiple culture. So that's what we do all the time. And all this work that we've done, we've been recognized by different agencies. We've been recognized twice with the Vera Institute in 2009, 2011, MetLife. We've been recognized by them. We've been recognized by the Mexican consulate for the work that we do, reaching out to the community. So we continue doing it. Now other agencies from different parts of the state wants to copy what we're doing. And I'm glad to share the wealth because if it helps for us, it will help their community as well because we are a unity of one. We need to help each other out to make sure that the safety of these people, not only these, but all people are protected and safe. That's why we're police. We're not here to abuse. We're not here to discriminate. We're here to protect. And it's important that we continue protecting and serving the community